folks. I am so excited to welcome to As the World Churns my friend, esteemed New York Times bestselling author of Dying of Whiteness, of What We've Become. He is also a psychiatrist, a professor, a dean at Vanderbilt University, Jonathan Metzl, which, if you remember from The New Abnormal, was a frequent guest there. And if you follow me, you know that he is a frequent guest on a bazillion shows that I also get to host and co-host. So Jonathan, welcome to As the World Churns. So today I want to talk to you about something that is very personal to me, which is the state of our mental health, our collective mental health during this time of an autocratic takeover, our falling empire, and what it means to live and exist amongst the crumbling. And I ask you this because I feel like right now, at least with a lot of people that listen to me that I hear from, are really struggling right now. And I did a show recently where talked very openly about the fact that I am very much struggling right now, that a lot of my mental health, self care interventions are not seeming to work right now. And so I want to get your thoughts on what you're hearing and seeing and how we should be thinking about our mental health and emotional well being during the rise of autocracy.
I mean, this is always an important conversation. First, let me say, hey, I'm so I'm so glad to be here. It feels like I've come home, So it's really nice to be having this conversation. And this question, I think, is one of the urgent questions of this moment, which is how do you take care of yourself when you've assumed that there are certain foundational structures under your life which turned out to be in danger. So it's not just about like the news, but it's also like just the daily drumbeat of anxiety about every time it used to be like doom scrolling, but now it's kind of like doom existing. Like
Mhm, mhm.
everywhere you go, there's something that is threatening and challenging. So that's part of it. Um, and then just the foundational structures that provide support and health. Things like the healthcare system, for example, or the economy, or infrastructure. All these things that we kind of depend on because what is a community but people working together to ostensibly share well-being. And so first, I would just want to say that that's a valid response, right? It's a valid
Yeah.
response to feel anxious right now. And what I'm seeing, this is very unofficial, is like there's like a spectrum, right? And
Mm.
on one hand of the spectrum is continual engagement, trauma, anxiety. You're always on guard. You have a high cortisol response.
Yep.
It's almost like you're like in a war almost, even though you're not technically in a war. But it's like I guess we could call it hypervigilance on one hand,
Mhm.
and the other hand is habituation, giving up, resigned, I just can't do anything about it, defeated, things like that. So there's a spectrum between hypervigilance, which is bad for your mental health and autonomic system, and giving up, which is also bad because that's, giving up. And so the question is like, how do you maintain some kind of stability in a way? And I guess there are a couple of things that I think are really, really important. Number one is, as we all know, it's an important time for community resilience. I'm encouraging everybody I know to like reach out to their support networks, to re-engage past support networks,
Yeah.
to imagine different kinds of community and be really, really creative about that. Part of this is very grassroots. So that's point number one that we can talk about. But the other important point is from a professional standpoint, the foundation underneath mental health is itself being dramatically threatened right now. And so the places that we would go to take care of our mental health, like a mental health practitioner, are really going to be challenged. And so part of the issue is, do we defend the mental health system? And the reason I'm saying this is because there's going to be a challenge to the approval for many standard, psychiatric drugs, for example. There's
Mhm.
going to be changes to the kinds of reimbursements people get from their health insurance. People are also going to lose their health insurance, um, because they're losing their employment, and so accessing mental health services. So there's like a community part, and then there's like a really real professional part, which is just the mental health industry that we rely on, is itself in its own crisis.
Because that's one of the things too, and I again, I speak about my own, emotional health
Much
and mental health, often. I have been in therapy for, 7 plus years, right? And, one of the things that I talk about with my therapist is, sometimes I ask, like, "Do you feel like your industry is actually built for this moment?" Because I think that traditionally, right, you're built for, those that have internalized mental health issues or chemical imbalances, right? That you are dealing with. This is very environmental and situational. And so do you think then, Jonathan, that like the mental health industry, do they actually have the tools to be able to help people manage through this when it's something like wildly different than what the industry has ever experienced before?
I love that question. That's such it's just such a brilliant question. Is the industry built for this moment? What would that mean? And I would say I hope it rises to the challenge, right? Mental health
Yeah.
has risen to the challenge of horrible crises, horrible catastrophes, global crises. There are trauma intervention models. There's PTSD treatment. There's mental health treatment in war zones. After the Holocaust is kind of the foundational moment for much
Mm,
of American psychiatry. So the foundations of our industry are supposed to be set up for this moment. But the flip side is, from like, well, all the books, all my research is that the idea that basically, oh, this is a psychological problem, you need to work on yourself, improve yourself. Oftentimes, that framework can be incredibly dismissive of or negating the fact that there are real political things. But I mean, like during the civil rights era, for example,
mhm,
like as you know from my work, black men were getting diagnosed with schizophrenia because they were saying the government is after me, and really the government was after them. It was actually a real response. And so I think hopefully we've learned over the years in mental health that it's not just enough to internalize things. Like sometimes you can also help people with strategies for dealing with real external crises. But the
yeah,
other two complicating parts of that are that it's not like a one size fits all motif, right? Some people have very different responses to external things than other people do. Some people give up, some people fight back, some people agree with it, some people disagree with it. So you just want to recognize that there are methods for understanding that. So that's part number 1. But again, part number 2 is what will the mental health industry need to do to literally defend itself, right? It's not just
mm,
about patients. It's that there are going to be hearings about like I don't know, 40-year-old treatments like antidepressants that have treated billions of people. Nobody's saying they're perfect. There are trade-offs for everything, but we're gonna have a lot of like really standard treatments thrown up for grabs. And so the question is, what's also the mental health industry gonna do to defend its own expertise, to defend its own financial structure? So it's not like, all these things are happening at once. And so I think it's important. I mean, believe it or not, I'm going to talk to psych audiences for the first time in a long time to try to explain to them like what's at stake right now.
Yeah, because I mean, look, we have both a surgeon general that was just nominated that is not a doctor. We have the head of Health and Human Services that is not a doctor, that believes that he has been helped with, using heroin and believes that fluoride causes autism. And so when you take something that is seemingly, to use a lack of a better term, invisible, right? A mental health issue is largely invisible to the naked eye. You can have a lot of theories as to how that should or should not be managed. And funny enough, I think that toxic masculinity actually plays a part in this regime's thinking with regard to mental health issues, right? Like, on one hand, Republicans consistently want to say, oh, the gun crisis, that's about an individual mental health issue. We also don't want to fund mental health, but it's not about the guns. But then it's also this mentality of, well, I'm this tough guy. I don't need any help. I alone can fix this. Like, there's nothing wrong with me. I don't need to change. And the entire industry is about how we evolve as humans and the supports that we need in order to be able to evolve in this hyper vigilant like space and place that we find ourselves. So when you take in, I guess, the deep character flaws that are inside of this regime and place that in the realm of mental health and their opinions about it, what do you think about how this is going to move, and are we sitting on top of another crisis that isn't actually being talked about?
To be clear, as I always say, I don't know anybody in the regime. I don't know anybody in the administration. I don't know what their character is or what their mental health is or anything like that. But I will say that if there's a framework correlate, having taught the history of psychiatry for many years, as you know, it's not for me toxic masculinity, it's actually eugenics. And the reason I say that is
Mm.
because there's a thread of the messaging, at least, that is basically like the strongest people will survive this. The most
Mhm.
deserving people will survive this. People who are willing to take their health in their own hands, who are strong enough to whatever. And it just seems to me to suffuse all of this. Vaccines. Only the strongest people will
Yep.
survive.
Yep.
And a lot of this messaging about mental health, it's kind of like who's deserving now. It's so frustrating because we've spent like 50 to 70 years fighting back against this strain of logic and showing how destructive it is for everybody, not just for you know certain people. I mean, everybody loses when that's the strain of thought. But this idea that basically people are deserving, groups are deserving, strongness will get you through. That was like an old, bad old stereotype of
Mhm.
mental health
Mhm. Mhm.
and of infectious illness. And the other thing we're seeing is the death of a kind of expertise. Now, I mean, I've spent my whole career being a critic of psychiatric expertise, and I never said, "Oh my gosh, it's perfect," but at least there's like a scientific method where you come up with a hypothesis, you have a treatment, you blind test that treatment against other treatments. The researchers don't know if they're doing the treatment or not. Then it goes out for review, and then it whatever. There's like a whole process. You can't just make up shit. And now it's like this perfect storm of like a particular kind of dismissiveness of the scientific method and the rise of so I guess who do we trust right now? Who do we trust,
Right.
and
Right.
how can we regain trust in science? And I think it's incumbent on the mental health community to do all these things. I mean, I know mental health community is not used to doing this kind of thing, but I think that's going to be the charge: is treating patients, recognizing the structure or the external forces are facing this, but also like defending our expertise, which we're not really used to doing.
Right, because I mean, on one hand, you have to become an advocate, right? Of and advocating for this industry and this space and why it's so important. And I think the reason why I ask if you think that we're sitting on top of a crisis or we're at a kind of critical tipping point when it comes to mental health is that we are watching, for instance, in one of the drafts of the Trump budget that was released, 988, a three-digit hotline for LGBTQ youth, suicide hotline, is zeroed out in the budget. 1.3 million LGBTQ kids and youth have utilized those services. It was a bipartisan initiative because of this community being more likely to have suicidal ideations than their straight peers, right? And so I wonder too if these places, these spaces, our healthcare are being zeroed out. These safety nets are being wiped away. What do you envision, Jonathan, for our future as again things are shifting so radically around us? How people, youth and adults are going to be able to be mentally solid, prepared, grounded during this time?
I mean, we are again, this is why I was saying about community before, because again, these foundational issues, I mean, a lot of the research about um, at-risk youth is coming from my department at Vanderbilt. So I know firsthand that people are losing their grants. There's going to be a change in knowledge, all these kinds of things, and so I just think that, but it's it's all kinds of communities. I mean, veterans are losing mental health access right now.
Right.
Clinics are closing, all these kinds of things. So it's just really, I just think that this kind of idea that we're all in this together, hopefully, I mean, and the hard part, as you were saying before, is you're being bombarded with so many things at one time that, it's a natural response to give up or to say, I'm just going to protect myself,
Right.
that kind of thing. But I just think that this is an urgent issue. I mean, I'm actually gonna be going around to psychiatric locations and asking people, like, what their strategies are because these questions are very similar to the questions I've been asking recently, and then the other thing is, if psychiatric medications get, withdrawn, it's
Mhm.
unimaginable what's our strategy after that, and so I think that this is all very inchoate. I just think what we're doing right now is the most important first step, which is recognizing it's a problem, and the problem is different from the problems we've had before, right? Because normally it was like psychiatric stigma. We worked so hard to overcome
Right, to get
psychiatric
to a place where yeah,
where
yeah.
we can even talk about it, and now it's kind of like we need to fight for the infrastructure that that's supported, right? Which is that we developed, an increasingly improving, I'm never gonna say it's perfect, mental health system, and the question is, um, where where do we go from there? And also, again, paying attention to our own mental health because I just think that that's something we forget about too often in a time like this.
Yeah, and I also think again, you're talking about your departments and where these studies and data and information comes from, and the fact is that those departments are being shut down, are losing funding, and that there is a brain drain that is going to happen in America. I know that you travel globally, and last question for you with just a couple of minutes that we have, you know, what happens if our scientists, researchers, and folks leave the United States because they've lost their funding because of fear of retribution? What happens to the state of psychiatric care, mental health, etc., in this country without those kinds of researchers?
I mean, whether or not they leave the United States, their research now is being defunded. And so where people are is important, right? But it's secondary to the fact that all this knowledge that would have come, and I mean, it's not just like some crazy far right or far left or something like that. Like the things that are being defunded now are like, can vaccines prevent pancreatic cancer? Things like I mean, so we're just losing so much knowledge, and a lot of that knowledge is gonna get taken up by other places. I mean, I don't see China cutting their scientific budget. I don't see Russia even, limiting the kind of research in infectious disease, in community illness, and things like that, and so I feel like we're putting ourselves behind as a country when we act like
Mhm.
this and reducing our own health. And the other part of this is, like, if you wanted to get a grant now showing that vaccines cause autism or that guns promote mental health or something, like, there's gonna be a slant. People thought there was a leftist slant on research, but I think what's coming is a rightist slant on research. So it gets back to the question of who do you trust and where do you go for information? I just think there's a information vacuum, a trust vacuum right now, and that's our job right now. We're gonna have to figure out how to fill that.
Well, we will leave it there today. Dr. Jonathan Metzl, as always, appreciate your time, your expertise, and your candidness. Thank you so much for making time for As the World Churns.
It's my honor, and let's please keep talking about this issue. It's so important.